No man dared to marry the obese black woman, until the Mafia boss said, "I will." She thought she was invisible, mocked, and rejected her whole life. But one night, when she saves a dying man in her diner, her world changes forever. Because he's not just any man, he's the most feared Mafia boss in the city. And in front of his men, his enemies, and even her family, he makes a shocking vow. "She is mine. She will be my wife." At first, she believes it's just protection. But when assassins come for her, and when she sees the monster he truly is, the man who kills without mercy, she realizes she's no longer a bystander. She's his obsession, his weakness, and his only redemption. But what happens when being claimed by the devil makes her the #1 target in a war she never asked for? Will this marriage save her life, or destroy them both? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as Janelle Davis moved between empty tables, wiping down surfaces that had already been cleaned twice before. The night shift at Eddie's diner dragged on, quiet except for the occasional rumble of distant traffic. Her reflection caught in the freshly cleaned chrome trim, a beautiful black woman with curves that her mother had always criticized. The memory of her mother's voice rang clear as day. "No man wants a woman your size, Janelle. You need to do something about yourself." 28 years old, and those words still stung like they were fresh. She'd proved her mother right so far. 3 relationships, all ended with variations of, "You're nice, but..." Janelle spritzed another table with cleaner, attacking an imaginary spot with more force than necessary. The empty streets outside the diner's wide windows looked eerie tonight, devoid of the usual late-night wanderers. Something felt off about the silence. The bell above the door chimed, startling her. A man stumbled in, one hand pressed against his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, staining his expensive-looking suit. He took 2 more steps before his knees buckled. Janelle's cleaning rag dropped from nerveless fingers as she rushed forward. The man collapsed, and she barely managed to catch him before his head hit the floor. He was heavy, solid muscle under the tailored clothes. "Oh God, oh God," she whispered, heart pounding. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, dark, intense eyes that seemed to pierce right through her despite his obvious pain. "Help," he managed through gritted teeth. Making a split-second decision, Janelle hooked her arms under his and began dragging him toward the back room. Her muscles strained with the effort, but adrenaline gave her strength. She couldn't leave him bleeding out on the diner floor. In the storage room's harsh lighting, she got her first good look at him as she helped him onto a stack of empty bread crates. Tattoos peeked from beneath his collar and cuffs. Not the trendy kind, but old-school, serious ink. A shoulder holster held an expensive-looking gun, and a knife handle protruded from his boot. This was no ordinary man who'd stumbled into her diner. Her hands shook as she grabbed the first aid kit from the wall. When she turned back, he was watching her with those unnervingly intense eyes, more alert now despite the pain. "Who are you?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper as she began cleaning the wound in his side. It looked like a bullet had grazed him, leaving a deep furrow across his ribs. "Matteo Romano," he said, his voice carrying an accent that made the name sound like music. Then his hand gripped her wrist, stopping her movements. "You know that name?" Janelle's breath caught. Everyone in the city knew that name, the head of the Romano crime family, the man they called Il Diavolo, the devil. Before she could respond, the front door's bell chimed again. Heavy footsteps and rough voices filled the diner. Janelle's heart nearly stopped as she heard them calling out, searching. "Where is he? Check the kitchen." Matteo tried to stand, but blood loss made him sway. Without thinking, Janelle pressed him back down. "The freezer," she whispered urgently. "Can you make it?" He nodded once, letting her help him to the industrial freezer. She opened the heavy door, and he slipped inside, pressing himself against the wall behind hanging sides of beef. Their eyes met for one intense moment before she closed the door, praying she wasn't making a terrible mistake. She had barely turned around when 3 men burst into the storage room, guns drawn. They wore black tactical gear, faces hard with purpose. "Where is he?" the leader demanded. Janelle forced her voice to remain steady, channeling every ounce of calm she'd learned from years of dealing with difficult customers. "Where's who? I'm alone here." "Romano. We tracked him this way." "I haven't seen anyone," she said, gesturing to the room. "Just me, cleaning up before closing." The man stepped closer, towering over her. "If you're lying, search the place," he barked to the others. "Every corner." Janelle's heart thundered in her chest as they tore through the storage room, knocked over boxes, checked behind shelves. One of them approached the freezer, and she held her breath. "Boss, this thing's locked tight," he called out after rattling the handle. "Need a key to open it. Besides, no one could survive in there long." The leader gave Janelle one last suspicious look before jerking his head toward the door. "He must have gone out the back. Move." She waited until their footsteps faded, until the bell chimed one final time, until several minutes of silence passed. Only then did she rush to the freezer and throw open the door. Matteo Romano emerged like a predator from its den, deadly grace in every movement despite his injury. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her step back. His hand shot out, fingers circling her wrist in an iron grip that wasn't quite painful, but broadcasted clearly that she couldn't escape if she tried. He pulled her closer, until she could feel the cold radiating from his clothes and see the dangerous gleam in his eyes. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but filled with dark promise as he whispered, "You just saved my life. Now you're mine." The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Janelle's trembling hands as she backed away from Matteo Romano, her heart hammering against her ribs. The events of the last hour felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. The wounded man, the gunman, and now this dangerous declaration. "You need to leave. Right now." Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. "I won't tell anyone what happened here tonight. Just, please go." Matteo's dark eyes fixed on her, unwavering. Even wounded, he radiated lethal grace. Blood still stained his expensive white shirt, but he moved like a predator as he stepped closer. "That's not how this works, Bella. I don't want any part of whatever this is." Janelle gestured at his bloody clothes, the gun visible beneath his jacket. "I'm nobody, just a waitress who happened to be here." A cold smile curved his lips. "You stopped being nobody the moment you saved my life." The diner's bell chimed, and Janelle's breath caught as 4 men in black suits entered. Their hands stayed near concealed weapons as they swept the space with practiced efficiency. The tallest one, sporting a jagged scar across his jaw, approached Matteo. "Boss, the area's secured. Cars waiting." His eyes flickered to Janelle with barely concealed suspicion. "Good." Matteo straightened, his presence filling the room despite his injuries. "This woman protected me tonight. She kept me hidden when Castellano's men came hunting." The men's expressions shifted from suspicion to shock. The scarred one spoke again. "A civilian? She knows who you are?" "She does." Matteo's hand shot out, catching Janelle's wrist as she tried to edge away. His grip was gentle, but unbreakable. "And now she's under my protection." Janelle's pulse raced beneath his fingers. "I don't need protection. I just want to forget this happened." "Impossible." Matteo turned to face his men, still holding her wrist. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Listen well. This woman is now under Romano protection. More than that, she will be my wife." The words hit like a physical blow. Janelle's knees weakened, and she would have stumbled if not for Matteo's grip. "What? No! You can't just decide that." The men exchanged loaded glances, but none dared question their boss. The scarred one, clearly a lieutenant, simply nodded. "We'll make arrangements." "This is insane." Janelle tried to pull away, but Matteo's hold remained firm. "You can't force someone to marry you." "I don't even know you." "You know I'm a man of power," Matteo said softly, dangerously. You know I command life and death in this city, and you know I pay my debts. His thumb brushed her racing pulse. You saved my life. Now I'll save yours. From what? Panic clawed at her throat. I was safe before you walked in here. You were safe because no one knew you existed. His eyes darkened. But Castellano's men saw you tonight. They'll be back, asking questions. Without my protection, you're dead by sunrise. The brutal truth of his words chilled her to the bone. She'd seen the hatred in the gunmen's eyes, their eagerness to kill, if they traced her. Time to go. Mateo nodded to his men. Carlo, Marcus, escort Miss Davis to the car. Two of the suits moved toward her. Janelle backed away, but there was nowhere to run. Wait, please. I can't just leave. My job. My apartment. All will be handled. Mateo's tone left no room for argument. Your safety comes first. The men flanked her, their grip, professional but unyielding as they guided her toward the door. Janelle's legs moved automatically, her mind spinning. This couldn't be happening. Just hours ago, she'd been living her quiet, unremarkable life. Now, the cool night air hit her face as they emerged onto the empty street. A sleek black SUV idled at the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the neon signs above. The men efficiently loaded her into the back seat, Mateo sliding in beside her despite his injuries. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Janelle pressed herself against the leather seat, as far from Mateo as possible. Through the windows, she watched her familiar world slip away. The diner's fading lights, the corner store where she bought her groceries, the bus stop she used every day. Each landmark disappeared into the darkness, taking with it another piece of her old life. The city lights blurred together as they gained speed, heading toward the wealthy districts she'd never visited. Beside her, Mateo sat in silence, his presence filling the space like smoke. His declaration echoed in her mind. She will be my wife. 4 simple words that had shattered her world like a bullet through glass. The SUV's engine hummed as they crossed the bridge, leaving her neighborhood behind. Janelle watched the river below, its dark waters reflecting the city's glow. Like those waters, she felt herself being pulled into depths she couldn't fathom, carried by currents too powerful to fight. Sunlight pierced through heavy silk curtains, rousing Janelle from a fitful sleep. For a moment she forgot where she was, until her eyes took in the ornate ceiling, gilded mirrors, and Italian furniture that definitely didn't belong in her modest apartment. Reality crashed back. She was in Matteo Romano's mansion, a prisoner in a golden cage. The king-sized bed swallowed her in Egyptian cotton sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Everything screamed luxury, from the hand-painted murals on the walls to the crystal chandelier catching morning light. But all Janelle felt was trapped. A soft knock preceded 2 silent maids entering with breakfast. They moved with practiced efficiency, setting up a small table by the window with fresh pastries, fruit, and steaming coffee. Neither met her eyes or spoke a word. When Janelle tried to thank them, they simply bowed and disappeared. Great. Even the staff acts like I'm radioactive, she muttered, wrapping herself in a plush robe she found in the closet. The coffee smelled divine, but her stomach churned with anxiety. After forcing down half a croissant, Janelle tested the bedroom door. It opened, revealing 2 suited men standing guard. They didn't stop her from stepping out, but their watchful presence made it clear she wasn't going anywhere without an escort. I'd like to look around, she said, proud that her voice remained steady. The taller guard nodded curtly, falling into step behind her as she wandered the massive estate. The mansion was a maze of marble floors, priceless art, and old-world grandeur. Every room spoke of generations of wealth and power. Under different circumstances, she might have been impressed. Now, each luxury felt like another bar in her cage. After an hour of exploring, she found Matteo in what appeared to be his office. He sat behind an imposing desk, looking immaculate in a tailored black suit despite last night's injuries. The morning light caught the silver in his dark hair, and his face showed no trace of pain. Sleep well? He asked without looking up from his papers. Cut the pleasantries, Janelle snapped. We need to talk about this insane situation. You can't just kidnap people and force them to marry you. This isn't the Dark Ages. Now he did look up, his expression unreadable. Sit down, Janelle. I'd rather stand. Sit down. His tone left no room for argument. Reluctantly, she sank into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. I want to go home. You can't. Why not? I told you I won't say anything about what happened. I'll disappear. Move to another city if I have to. Mateo leaned forward, his dark eyes boring into hers. The men who came looking for me last night. They saw your face. They know you helped me. In our world, that makes you a target. But there are no loose ends in this life, Kara. If I let you walk away, you'd be dead within 24 hours. The Calabrese family doesn't leave witnesses. The finality in his voice made her blood run cold. So what? I'm just supposed to accept being your prisoner. Not my prisoner, my wife. Same difference, his jaw tightened. I'm offering you protection, a life of luxury. Many women would be grateful. I'm not many women, Janelle shot back. I had a life. A job. Friends. A life where you were alone, working night shifts. In a diner. He cut in. Don't pretend you're leaving behind paradise. The truth in his words stung, but she refused to let him see it affect her. Still, as their conversation continued, the reality of her situation sank in like lead in her stomach. There was no way out. No escape that didn't end with her dead. That evening, Janelle found herself seated at an endless dining table beside Mateo. Men she recognized as his top lieutenants filled the other chairs, their curious gazes making her skin crawl. Gentlemen, Mateo addressed them, his hand possessively covering hers on the table. Meet my future wife. The announcement was met with raised glasses and congratulations. But Janelle saw the questions in their eyes. What made her special? Why would the feared Mateo Romano choose someone like her? She barely touched her food, despite the 5-star quality of every dish. As soon as politeness allowed, she fled to her room, slamming the door with all her frustration, only to freeze at the sight of Mateo already there, seated in an armchair by the window. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face as he read what appeared to be an old letter. The paper yellowed with age. For the first time, she saw something other than the cold crime lord. His fingers traced the words with unusual gentleness, and there was a softness around his eyes she hadn't witnessed before. He looked up, catching her stare, and for a brief moment, Janelle glimpsed past his carefully constructed walls. There was pain there, and something that looked surprisingly like loneliness. My mother's last letter, he said quietly, answering her unspoken question. She wrote it knowing she was dying, telling me to find someone who would see past the monster everyone else sees. The vulnerability in his voice made her breath catch, but before she could respond, his walls slammed back into place, and the untouchable Mafia boss returned. Janelle crept down the dimly lit hallway, her bare feet silent against the marble floor. The mansion felt different at night, more threatening, like the luxurious facade had fallen away to reveal its true nature as a criminal fortress. Voices echoed from Mateo's study, harsh whispers that made her pause. She's a liability, boss. The gravelly voice belonged to Angelo, Mateo's consigliere. Every hour she stays here puts the organization at risk. Watch your tongue. Mateo's reply was ice cold. My decisions aren't up for debate. The Calabrese family already put out feelers. 200,000 for her head. They know keeping her alive means something to you, that makes her valuable. Janelle's heart hammered against her ribs. $200,000 for her death. The walls seemed to close in as she pressed herself against the cool marble, straining to hear more. Let them try. Mateo's voice dropped lower, deadly. I'll paint this city red with their blood. This isn't about territory anymore. They think you've gone soft. First time in 15 years you've shown interest in a woman, and it's some random civilian? The other families smell weakness. Something crashed inside the study, probably Matteo's temper exploding. Janelle flinched at the sound of breaking glass. "Get out." Matteo's command left no room for argument. "Now." Footsteps approached the door. Janelle scrambled back, but not fast enough. The door swung open, and she found herself face to face with both men. Angelo's eyes narrowed dangerously, while Matteo's expression shifted from rage to something unreadable. "How much did you hear?" Matteo asked quietly. Anger surged through her veins, burning away her fear. "Enough to know you've got me marked for death." She stepped forward, jabbing a finger at his chest. "You did this. You dragged me into your world? And now I've got a price on my head?" Angelo moved to intercept her, but Matteo waved him away. The consigliere departed with a final disapproving glance. "You're right." Matteo's admission surprised her. He caught her wrist, not roughly, but firm enough to keep her from pulling away. "They'll come for you because they know you're mine now. That's not going to change." "I never asked to be yours." The words burst out of her. "I helped you because you were hurt, not to become your possession." Something flickered in his dark eyes. Not anger, but something more complex. He led her to the window, forcing her to look out at the sprawling city lights below. His chest pressed against her back, his breath warm against her ear. "See those lights? Behind them, men are planning how to hurt you to get to me. Never underestimate how dangerous they are." His voice softened, though his grip remained steady. "You think I claimed you on a whim? The moment you helped me, you became a target. Marking you as mine was the only way to keep you alive." Janelle shivered, not entirely from fear. His proximity sent electricity through her skin, even as his words chilled her. "So I'm supposed to just accept this? Being owned?" "Protected," he corrected. His free hand came to rest on her shoulder, the touch unexpectedly. Gentle. "There's a difference." She turned to face him, ready to argue further, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Gone was the cold mask of the Mafia boss. For a moment, she glimpsed something raw, almost vulnerable. It transformed his harsh features, making him devastatingly handsome in the moonlight. "I won't apologize for keeping you safe," he murmured, "but I never meant to frighten you." The tension between them shifted, electric and dangerous in a new way. Janelle became acutely aware of how close they stood, how his hand had slid from her shoulder to the small of her back. His touch burned through the thin fabric of her nightgown. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I'm afraid of this world you've pulled me into." His expression softened further. "Good. Fear will keep you alive. But remember, in this world, you have me, and I protect what's mine." Hours later, Janelle lay in her bed, mind spinning with the evening's revelations. The silk sheets felt cool against her skin, but she couldn't shake the lingering warmth of Matteo's touch. Sleep came fitfully, dreams mixing with reality. A sharp crack shattered the night. Glass exploded inward, spraying across her bed. Before she could scream, a solid weight slammed into her, pushing her to the floor. Matteo's body covered hers, shielding her as another bullet whizzed overhead. "Stay down," he growled, one arm wrapped protectively around her waist. His other hand already held a pistol, ready to return fire. No One Touches sunlight streamed through the newly reinforced windows of Matteo's office, but Janelle felt none of its warmth. His black suit jacket draped over her shoulders like a shield, its expensive fabric carrying his scent, sandalwood and gunpowder. She fixed her gaze on the Persian rug, refusing to meet the steel-gray eyes she could feel burning into her. "Look at me." Matteo's voice carried that edge of command that made his men snap to bland. Attention. But Janelle wasn't one of his soldiers. "I'm done being ordered around," she said, pulling his jacket tighter. The bullet hole in her bedroom window kept flashing through her mind. "I didn't ask for any of this. You made that choice when you saved my life." He moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. "Now you'll stay where I can protect you." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Protect me? You're the reason I need protection in the first place." She finally looked up, meeting his gaze with defiance. The great Matteo Romano, thinking he can control everything and everyone. How's that working out? His jaw tightened, a muscle ticking beneath his skin. You mock what you don't understand. My enemies won't stop until they destroy anything. He caught himself, turning away. Anything you what? Own? Janelle stood, letting his jacket fall to the chair. I'm not one of your properties, Matteo. He whirled back, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. You think this is about ownership? That bullet was meant for your heart. His voice dropped lower, rough, with something that wasn't quite anger. If you had died in that room, then you'd have lost your latest possession. She lifted her chin, even as her pulse raced at his proximity. Stubborn woman. His hands gripped the edge of his desk on either side of her, caging her in. You'll stay in this mansion under my guard, where I can keep you safe. That's not a request. The heat of his body seeped through her thin sweater, making it hard to think. And if I refuse, you won't. His confidence should have infuriated her more, but there was something else in his voice. A thread of desperation beneath the steel. The days that followed became a dance of avoidance and collision. Meals were silent battles across his massive dining table, his dark eyes following her every move as she picked at food too expensive to name. They crossed paths in hallways, the air crackling between them, until one of them broke first, sparking arguments that left them both breathing hard. Your guards. Follow me everywhere, she snapped one afternoon, cornering him outside his study. I can't even read a book without someone watching me. Would you prefer another sniper takes aim while you're reading? He stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. Or should I wait until they send someone to grab you off the grounds? Maybe they should. It would save us both the trouble of… She stopped as his hand shot out, gripping her arm. Don't. The word was guttural, almost pained. Don't ever say that. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. She jerked away, retreating to her room, but she could feel his stare following her down the hall. That night, sleep eluded her. The mansion creaked and settled, every sound making her jump. After hours of tossing and turning, she gave up. Maybe some chamomile tea would help, assuming she could find the kitchen without her shadows. The marble floors were cold under her bare feet as she padded downstairs. The kitchen lay in darkness, moonlight spilling through vast windows. She had just reached for the light switch when a voice froze her in place. Couldn't sleep? Matteo emerged from the shadows, his white shirt gleaming in the darkness. He looked different here, less the untouchable Mafia boss, more the man beneath. I was just… She gestured vaguely at the kettle. Tea. You shouldn't be wandering alone at night. He moved closer, each step deliberate. I shouldn't be here at all. The words came out sharper than intended. No? His voice dropped lower as he advanced. Where should you be, Janelle? Back at that diner, waiting for my enemies to find you? She backed up until she hit the counter. Stop acting like you're doing me some noble favor. You're keeping me prisoner because your ego can't handle. His hand slammed down on the counter on either side of her, trapping her between his arms. The heat of him pressed against her, his face inches from hers. My ego? His breath fanned across her lips. You think that's what this is about? Janelle's heart thundered in her chest. His mouth hovered over hers, so close she could feel the electricity crackling between them. For one endless moment, the world narrowed to just this. His body caging hers, the midnight kitchen, the unbearable tension drawing them together. Then Matteo pulled back, just slightly. His eyes were dark with promise and restraint as he whispered, Not yet. He stepped away, leaving her trembling against the counter, the phantom heat of his almost kiss burning on her lips. The city skyline glittered beyond the tinted windows of Matteo's Rolls-Royce, a view Janelle hadn't seen in days. She pressed her fingertips against the cool glass, drinking in the familiar streets she once walked freely. Now, 2 black SUVs flanked them, one ahead, one behind, filled with Matteo's armed guards. You look troubled, Matteo said from beside her. his presence both suffocating and magnetic. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in a year, every detail perfect except for the slight bulge of his shoulder holster. "Just remembering what freedom felt like," Janelle replied, smoothing her navy dress, another gift she hadn't asked for. "Before I became your favorite prisoner." His jaw tightened. "You're not a prisoner." "Really?" She gestured at their armed escort. "Could have fooled me." The car descended into the underground parking garage of an upscale shopping center, concrete pillars casting alternating shadows across her face. Janelle noticed how Mateo's hand stayed near his jacket, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The convoy parked in a reserved section. Mateo's guards emerged first, spreading out in practiced formation. Only then did Mateo step out, extending his hand to help her. Janelle ignored it, climbing out herself. "Stubborn woman," he muttered, but she caught the ghost of a smile on his lips. The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the garage's silence. Mateo moved with terrifying speed, shoving Janelle behind a concrete pillar. His gun appeared in his hand like magic. "Stay down!" he roared, just as 3 men in black tactical gear emerged from behind parked cars. Janelle pressed herself against the cold concrete, heart thundering in her chest. The garage erupted in chaos, muzzle flashes, shouting, the terrible orchestra of violence. She caught glimpses of Mateo moving like a demon unleashed, all fluid grace and lethal precision. The first attacker died quickly, Mateo's bullet finding his throat. The second managed to get closer, but Mateo's knife appeared, slashing across the man's chest before plunging into his heart. Blood sprayed across Mateo's white shirt like abstract art. The third man tried to circle around, aiming for Janelle. She saw the moment Mateo's eyes registered the threat. They blazed with such murderous fury that she felt it like a physical force. He launched himself at the attacker, tackling him to the ground. The struggle was brutal but brief. Mateo's hands locked around the man's head and twisted sharply. The crack echoed through the garage. Silence fell, broken only by Janelle's ragged breathing and the distant wail of sirens. Mateo's men secured the perimeter while he strode back to her, blood spattered and terrifying. Yet when he reached for her, his touch was impossibly gentle. "Are you hurt?" His eyes raked over her, checking for injuries. "Janelle, answer me." She should have been revolted. She had just watched him kill 3 men with ruthless efficiency. But all she could think about was how he'd positioned himself between her and danger. How quickly he'd eliminated the threat to her life. "I'm okay," she whispered, surprised to find her voice steady. You killed them." "Yes." No excuses, no justification, just that simple admission. His men approached with news. The attackers were from a rival family. More would likely come. Mateo barked orders, his arm never leaving Janelle's waist as they hurried back to the car. The ride home was tense. Mateo's blood-stained shirt a stark reminder of what had happened. Janelle found herself stealing glances at his profile, trying to reconcile the brutal killer with the man who touched her like she was made of glass. Back at the mansion, Mateo dismissed everyone except 2 guards posted outside. In his private study, he still hadn't changed his shirt, the blood now dried to a rusty brown. His eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Are you afraid of me now?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "Now that you've seen what I really am." Janelle trembled, but not from fear, from the storm of emotions raging inside her. She had seen his violence, yes, but also his protection, the way he'd moved to shield her, the fury in his eyes when someone threatened her. "I don't know," she whispered, and it was the truest answer she could give. He took a step closer, and another, until she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. Blood stained his collar, spattered across his jaw, yet his touch remained gentle as he lifted her chin. "You should be," he murmured, but his eyes held something that looked almost like pleading. "You should run from me while you still can." But Janelle didn't move. She stood there, heart racing, caught in the gravity of his presence. The man who dealt death without hesitation, who had just killed to keep her safe, who looked at her now like she held his salvation in her hands. "I don't know," she repeated, softer this time, feeling the words tremble in the air between them. Moonlight spilled across the balcony's marble floor, casting long shadows as Janelle settled into one of the cushioned chairs. The night air carried a hint of autumn's chill, making her pull her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. Beside her, Mateo sat rigid in his seat, his bandaged hands resting on the ornate armrests. The white gauze couldn't hide the violence those hands were capable of, violence she'd witnessed firsthand just hours ago. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Janelle studied his profile, noting how the shadows seemed to deepen the hard lines of his face. His usual mask of cold control had cracks tonight, something raw bleeding through. "You want to know why?" Mateo said finally, his voice rough. It wasn't a question. "Why I became this monster they call Il Diavolo." Janelle's breath caught. In all these weeks he'd never offered information about himself. "Yes," she answered softly. He flexed his injured hands, the bandages crinkling. 5 years ago, I thought I knew what love was." His laugh held no warmth. "Isabella. She was beautiful, clever, everything I thought I wanted. My brother Marco warned me she wasn't what she seemed." Pain flashed across his face, there and gone so quickly Janelle might have missed it if she hadn't been watching so closely. Marco was right. She was working for the Castellanos the whole time, fed them information, schedules, security details. His jaw clenched. "The night they came for us, Marco took the bullets meant for me." Janelle's hand moved instinctively toward his, stopping just short of touching. "Mateo." I held him while he bled out. The words came harder now, each one dragged from somewhere deep and dark. "My little brother died because I was fool enough to trust love." The city lights twinkled below them, oblivious to the weight of confession hanging in the air. Janelle's heart ached for the man before her. Not the ruthless Mafia boss, but the brother who'd lost everything to betrayal. "After that, I made a vow," Mateo continued. "No more weakness, no more trust, no more love." His dark eyes found hers. "Until you." The intensity of his gaze made her breath hitch. Janelle looked away first. Her own, painful memories rising to the surface. "I understand something about promises made from pain," she said quietly. Mateo shifted in his chair, turning toward her. "Tell me." She hadn't meant to share, but something about his vulnerability called to her own. "My mother started planning my wedding when I was 12, Janelle began, her voice steady despite the old hurt. She had everything picked out, the dress, the flowers, the church, everything, except the groom. Her fingers twisted in her lap. As I got older, she became desperate. Started setting me up with any man who'd agree to meet me, but none of them wanted." She swallowed hard. She told me I was too fat, too plain, too much of everything wrong to ever be wanted, that no man would ever choose me as his wife. Mateo's bandaged hand shot out, gripping hers with surprising gentleness. "Your mother was wrong." "Was she?" Janelle met his gaze. "You didn't choose me, Mateo. You claimed me like property because I saw too much." "No." The word came out sharp, almost angry. "I claimed you because you saw me. Not Il Diavolo, not the monster everyone fears. You saw me bleeding and helped without hesitation. You protected me without knowing who I was." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Do you know how rare that is in my world? To find someone genuine, someone real?" The tension between them shifted, something electric replacing the earlier heaviness. Janelle felt it in every point where their skin touched, in every breath that seemed to sync with his. "I don't want to be another Isabella," she whispered. "You couldn't be." His voice dropped lower, intimate. "She was a lie from the start. You're honest to your core, even when you're defying me. Even when you're furious with me, you're real." They sat in comfortable silence after that, hands still linked, watching the stars emerge above the city's glow. Eventually, Janelle excused herself, leaving Matteo alone with his thoughts. Hours later, unable to sleep, she padded down to his study. The door was ajar, warm lamplight spilling into the hallway. She found him there, slumped in his leather chair, eyes closed. An old, creased letter lay in his lap. His mother's final words, she knew. Janelle moved closer, studying his face in repose. Sleep softened his features, erasing the hardness that usually dominated his expression. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers brushing his bandaged hand where it rested on the letter. Her touch was feather light, but she felt him tense slightly. Too late, she realized his breathing had changed. He wasn't asleep at all. His eyes opened slowly, burning with an intensity that pinned her in place. Neither spoke, the moment stretching taut between them like a wire about to snap. Sunlight streamed through the high windows of Matteo's private training room, warming the polished wooden floors. Janelle stood awkwardly in borrowed workout clothes, feeling exposed in the fitted leggings and tank top. Matteo circled her slowly, his own muscled frame dressed in black sweats and a fitted t-shirt that left little to imagination. "First lesson," he said, his voice low and focused. "Stance is everything." His hands found her hips, adjusting her position. Even through fabric, his touch burned. "Wider. You need a solid foundation." Janelle's breath caught as he moved behind her, his chest pressing against her back. "Like this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Better." His fingers trailed down her arms, positioning them in a defensive pose. "Now, when someone grabs you from behind," he demonstrated, with a loose hold around her waist. "You strike here, here, and here." They moved through basic self-defense positions, each touch lingering longer than necessary. Sweat gathered at Janelle's temples, her skin hypersensitive to every point of contact. She could feel Matteo's restraint in the tension of his muscles, in the controlled way he guided her movements. "Again," he commanded, grabbing her wrist. This time when she turned to break free, she lost her balance. Matteo caught her against his chest, their faces inches apart. His dark eyes blazed with something more dangerous than combat. Janelle started, but his mouth claimed hers before she could finish. The kiss was devastating, all the pent-up tension of weeks exploding at once. His hands tangled in her hair as he backed her against the mirrored wall, lifting her easily. "Tell me to stop," he growled against her throat. "Tell me you don't want this." Instead, Janelle pulled him closer, surrendering to the heat between them. His kisses grew more demanding, possessive. When he finally broke away, they were both breathing hard. "Not here," Matteo said roughly. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, carrying her from the training room. The journey to his bedroom was a blur of heated touches and half-shed clothes. In his bed, Matteo worshipped her body with an intensity that brought tears to her eyes. Where others had seen flaws, he saw beauty. His hands and mouth traced every curve with reverence, drawing sounds from her she never knew she could make. When they finally came together, it was with a passion that bordered on desperation. "Mine," he breathed against her skin. "Say you're mine." "Yours," Janelle gasped and felt his control snap. The tenderness gave way to raw need, marking her as his in every way possible. Hours later, she lay in his arms, watching moonlight paint shadows across his sleeping face. For the first time since entering his world, she felt truly safe. Protected, cherished. Morning came too soon, bringing reality with it. Matteo had left early for business, leaving her alone in his massive bed. Wrapped in his silk robe, Janelle padded down the hallway toward the kitchen, craving coffee. Voices from Matteo's study made her pause. "The boss is playing it perfectly." A man's voice. She recognized Antonio, Matteo's second in command. The Castellanos won't be able to resist taking the bait now that he's actually sleeping with her. "You sure about this plan?" Another voice asked. "Using the girl as bait is risky. If they grab her..." "That's exactly what we want," Antonio replied. "They take her, they expose themselves. Boss gets his revenge for his brother. We take their territory. Clean and simple. The coffee forgotten. Janelle pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting nausea. Last night's passion turned to ash in her memory. She'd been a fool to think she meant anything more than a strategic move in his game. She was dressed and waiting in his office when Mateo returned an hour later. The moment he saw her face, his expression darkened. "How long?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "How long have you been setting me up as bait for your enemies?" "Janelle." He moved toward her, but she backed away. "Don't." Tears burned in her eyes. "Was any of it real? Or was last night just part of your perfect plan?" Before he could answer, glass shattered somewhere in the mansion. Gunfire erupted, followed by screams. Mateo's expression turned lethal as he reached for her, but smoke was already filling the room. Men in black tactical gear and masks burst through the door. Mateo threw himself between them and Janelle, taking down two with brutal efficiency. But there were too many. Strong arms grabbed her from behind, dragging her toward the window. "Mateo!" she screamed, fighting against her captors. The last thing she saw was his face, transformed by a fury that chilled her blood as he fought desperately to reach her. Then something struck her head, and darkness claimed her. Janelle's head throbbed as consciousness crept back. The zip ties bit into her wrists, secured behind a metal chair that felt ice cold against her back. The warehouse air hung thick with dust and the metallic tang of old blood. Through swollen eyes, she made out stacks of shipping containers looming in the shadows, their surfaces tagged with graffiti that glowed eerily in the dim light filtering through grimy windows. Her whole body ached from the rough handling during her capture. The memory flashed back. Masked men storming the estate, the crack of gunfire, Mateo's roar of rage as they dragged her away. She tested the restraints, but they only dug deeper into her flesh. "Finally awake, Sleeping Beauty?" A man's voice echoed through the warehouse, followed by measured footsteps. He emerged from the shadows tall, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the gritty surroundings. Unlike Mateo's controlled danger, this man's eyes held nothing but cruel amusement. "Who are you?" Janelle's voice came out hoarse, her throat dry from whatever they'd used to knock her out. He smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "Carlo Vincetti, though I'm sure Il Diavolo has mentioned me." When she didn't respond, he laughed. "No, I'm hurt, after all the trouble I've caused him lately." Janelle's mind raced. This was the rival boss behind the attacks, the sniper, the garage ambush, the man who wanted Mateo dead. Carlo circled her chair slowly, like a shark scenting blood. "You know, when I heard Romano had claimed some waitress as his bride, I thought he'd lost his mind." His fingers traced her shoulder, making her skin crawl. "But now I see what caught his eye. There's fire in you, isn't there? Something different." "You're wasting your time," Janelle said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "I'm just a hostage, nothing more." "Oh, Cara." Carlo gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "We both know that's not true. I've watched him with you. The great Matteo Romano brought low by love." He spat the word like poison. "You're his weakness." Fear clawed at Janelle's chest, not for herself, but for Matteo. She thought of him sleeping in his chair, vulnerable with his mother's letter. The tenderness in his eyes when he'd kissed her in the training room. All the little cracks in his armor that only she had seen. "You're wrong," she insisted, injecting as much contempt as she could into her voice. "Matteo Romano doesn't love anyone. I'm just convenient protection, a civilian shield to keep cops off his back. He'll never come for me." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Even as she spoke them, her heart screamed the truth. Matteo would come. The man who'd killed 3 attackers in the garage without hesitation, who'd promised no one would touch her while he breathed he would burn the world to find her. Carlo's laugh echoed off the warehouse walls. Such loyalty, lying to protect him. He pulled out a phone, showing her security footage of the estate. Matteo interrogating someone, his fists bloody. "He's been tearing the city apart for hours, torturing my men for information. That's not business, Kara. That's love, making him crazy. Janelle closed her eyes, fighting tears. She'd accused Mateo of using her as bait, and now she'd become exactly that, the perfect trap for a man who'd sworn never to love again. Carlo's phone buzzed. His smile widened as he read the message. Right on schedule. Seems Il Diavolo found one of my men who talked. He drew a gun, checking the magazine with practiced ease. Now we wait for Romeo to come save his Juliet. He'll kill you, Janelle whispered, and she meant it. She'd seen the darkness in Mateo, the capacity for violence he kept leashed. But for her, there would be no mercy, no restraint. Maybe, Carlo shrugged, moving toward the warehouse's upper level. But first, he'll watch you die. That's the thing about loving someone, it makes you stupid. Makes you rush in without thinking. Guards took up positions around the warehouse, weapons ready. Janelle pulled against the zip ties until blood trickled down her wrists. But they held fast. The minutes stretched like hours, filled only with her ragged breathing and the distant sounds of the city. Then she heard it gunfire in the distance, followed by shouts and the screech of tires. Her heart lurched. More shots, closer now. The sound of running boots on metal stairs. One of Carlo's men called out in Italian, fear clear in his voice. A single shot answered, followed by a heavy thud. Janelle's pulse thundered in her ears. She thought of their last moment together, her angry accusations, the hurt in his eyes before chaos erupted. If these were her final moments, she wished she could take it back. Tell him she understood now, that she— A burst of automatic fire shattered the windows, sending glass raining down. Somewhere above, Carlo barked orders. More shots, more shouts cut short. Getting closer. Hope and terror warred in Janelle's chest. Mateo was coming, the man she'd tried to push away. The killer, the protector. The impossible contradiction who'd claimed her life and her heart. He was coming, and blood would flow. The warehouse doors exploded inward with a deafening crash. Through the smoke and chaos, she heard a sound that chilled her blood and filled her with fierce joy. Mateo's voice, cold as death itself, calling her name. The warehouse doors exploded inward with a thunderous crash. Through her blurred vision, Janelle saw him, Matteo Romano, transformed into something beyond human. His usual elegant composure had vanished, replaced by raw, lethal purpose. Blood already stained his white shirt, and his eyes held a darkness she'd never witnessed before. "Find her!" His voice roared through the warehouse, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Janelle's captor yanked her head back by her hair, pressing a cold barrel against her temple. One more step, Romano, and she dies. But Matteo was already moving, a deadly shadow weaving between shipping containers. His men spread out through the warehouse, their gunfire creating a deafening symphony of chaos. Bullets pinged off metal, and screams echoed through the vast space. Through tear-filled eyes, Janelle watched Matteo execute his enemies with mechanical precision. One man charged him with a knife. Matteo caught his wrist, twisted, and drove the blade into the attacker's throat without hesitation. Another tried to flank him, but Matteo's bullet found its mark between the man's eyes before he could squeeze his trigger. "You see what kind of monster you're in love with," her captor hissed in her ear, his hand trembling against her skin. "This is what he really is," Janelle's heart hammered in her chest. The Matteo before her was different from the man who'd held her so tenderly just hours ago. This was Il Diavolo, the devil himself, dealing death with terrifying efficiency. But even as horror filled her, she couldn't look away. A rival made the mistake of trying to use a hostage as a shield. Matteo's response was instantaneous, a single shot that passed through the enemy's forehead, leaving the hostage unharmed. His accuracy was inhuman, his movements fluid like a predator's dance. "Last chance, Romano." Her captor's voice cracked with desperation. "Drop your weapon or—" The man never finished his threat. Matteo's bullet caught him in the wrist, causing him to release both Janelle and his gun with a howl of pain. Before he could recover, Matteo was there, moving faster than seemed possible. Janelle watched, frozen, as Matteo grabbed her former captor by the throat. "You dared to touch what's mine?" His voice was ice, promising something worse than death. The man blubbered, begging for mercy, but Mateo's expression showed none. With clinical precision, he pressed his gun under the man's jaw. Die, knowing you failed. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse, and warm droplets spattered across Janelle's face. In the sudden silence, Mateo turned to her, his hands already working on the zip ties. His fingers trembled as he freed her, ghost light against her abraded skin. The contrast between his brutal efficiency moments ago and his gentle touch now made her head spin. Janelle. His voice broke on her. Name as he cupped her face, thumbs wiping away blood and tears. Mi amor, look at me. She forced herself to meet his gaze. The darkness was still there, but now mixed with something else. Fear, desperation, and an emotion so intense it stole her breath. I would burn the world before I lose you, he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. Every city, every kingdom, every soul who dares to take you from me, I'll destroy them all. The raw honesty in his voice shook her to her core. This was no empty threat or romantic declaration. This was a promise, written in blood and bullets, proven by the bodies cooling on the warehouse floor. Janelle's legs gave out, and Mateo caught her, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She pressed her face into his neck, breathing in gunpowder and his familiar cologne. His heart thundered against her palm, betraying the fear he'd felt. I've got you, he murmured, holding her closer. You're safe now, Tesoro. No one will ever touch you again. Around them, the warehouse had become an inferno, whether from stray bullets hitting something flammable or a deliberate act by Mateo's men. Flames licked up the walls and danced across spilled fuel. The heat pressed against them as Mateo carried her through the carnage. Bodies littered their path, some groaning, most silent. Mateo's men executed the survivors with efficiency, ensuring no witnesses remained. The flames cast everything in hellish orange light, transforming the warehouse into a vision of damnation. Janelle should have been terrified. She should have been repulsed by the violence, by the casual way death had been dealt. Instead, she found herself clinging tighter to Mateo, understanding with startling clarity that this bloodshed was an expression of his love, twisted and dark as it might be. As they emerged into the cool night air, Mateo's arms tightened around her. Behind them, the warehouse blazed, a funeral pyre for those who had dared to come between them. The flames reflected in Mateo's eyes as he looked down at her, still carrying her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. In that moment, surrounded by fire and death, Janelle realized she had crossed a line. She could no longer pretend this was just captivity or Stockholm Syndrome. Whatever darkness lived in Mateo, whatever violence he was capable of, she had chosen to accept it all. Janelle sat on the edge of Mateo's bed, her wrists still raw from the ropes. The silk sheets felt impossibly soft against her skin, a stark contrast to the rough warehouse floor where she'd been held captive hours ago. Armed guards stood outside every entrance to the mansion, their shadows visible through the frosted glass. Mateo hadn't left her side since carrying her from that burning warehouse. He paced the room like a caged tiger, his bloodied shirt replaced but his hands still bearing traces of violence. Every few minutes, his eyes would snap to her, as if assuring himself she was really there. You need to rest, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. So do you. Janelle watched him run his fingers through his disheveled dark hair. You haven't stopped moving since we got back. I can't. He turned to face her, his shoulders tight with tension. Every time I close my eyes, I see you in that warehouse. If I had been minutes later... But you weren't. Janelle stood, wincing at her sore muscles. You came for me. Of course I came for you. His eyes flashed dangerously. You're mine. There it was again. That word. Mine. It sparked something in Janelle, a defiance that even hours of captivity couldn't dim. No. She lifted her chin. I'm not yours. Not like that. Mateo went still, the kind of stillness that usually preceded violence. But Janelle wasn't afraid anymore. She'd seen the worst of him now. seen what he was capable of. And still, she stayed. I saw what you did in that warehouse, she continued. I saw Il Diavolo, the devil himself. But I also saw a man who would tear the world apart to protect what he loves. She took a step closer. That's the difference, Matteo. Love, not possession. His jaw clenched. What are you saying? I'm saying I won't be a trophy or a possession. I won't be something you own. Her voice grew stronger. If you want me, truly want me, it has to be as your equal, your partner, not your property. Matteo moved toward her with predatory grace, but Janelle stood her ground. He towered over her, his presence filling the room with dangerous energy. You don't understand what you're asking, he growled. In my world? Your world needs to change. Janelle reached up, touching his face where a bruise was forming. Because I won't change who I am, not even for you. Something shifted in his eyes, a crack in the armor he wore like a second skin. His hand caught hers, holding it against his cheek. When they took you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I felt it here. He pressed her hand to his chest, where his heart thundered beneath expensive fabric, like they'd ripped out my heart and left me bleeding. Then say it, Janelle challenged. Say what this really is. Matteo's breath caught. Then, to her absolute shock, he lowered himself to one knee before her. The most feared man in the city, kneeling at her feet. You want truth? His voice was raw. The truth is you terrify me, Janelle Davis, because you've made me feel things I swore I'd never feel again. You make me want more than power and control. You make me want love. Tears pricked at Janelle's eyes, but she blinked them back. And you're right. You're not my possession. His hands gripped hers, gentle despite the violence they'd dealt hours ago. You're my queen, my equal, the woman I love, more than my own life. Janelle's heart soared, but she wasn't finished. Promise me I'll never be your prisoner again. I promise. He rose slowly, pulling her against him. But I can't. Promise I won't still be possessive. It's who I am. I'll always want to protect you, to keep you safe. I can live with protective, she murmured, sliding her arms around his neck. As long as you remember I'm not some delicate flower, I'm strong enough to stand beside you. Strong enough to bring Il Diavolo to his knees, he agreed, a smile touching his lips. When he kissed her, it wasn't with the careful restraint he'd shown before. This was raw passion, fierce and consuming. Janelle melted into him, returning his intensity with her own. His hands tangled in her hair as he deepened the kiss, pouring months of longing and fear and love into a single moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Matteo pressed his forehead to hers. My queen, he whispered. And this time it wasn't a possession, it was a promise. Janelle smiled against his lips. My king, she answered, sealing their new understanding with another passionate kiss. In that moment, surrounded by his warmth and strength, she knew they'd found something rare and precious, a love strong enough to survive both heaven and hell. This time, when Matteo pulled her closer, there was no hesitation, no power play, just two souls who'd found their perfect match in the most unlikely of places. His kiss burned with devotion, and Janelle returned it with equal fervor, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together not as master and possession, but as king and queen of their own dangerous, beautiful world. The mansion's private chapel glowed with hundreds of flickering candles, casting dancing shadows across ancient stone walls. Janelle stood before the ornate wooden doors, her heart thundering beneath Italian silk and delicate lace. The wedding dress hugged every curve of her body she had refused to hide herself away, choosing instead a gown that celebrated her figure. Crystal beading caught the light, making her shimmer like a star brought down to earth. Ready? Antonio Matteos, consigliere, offered his arm. He would walk her down the aisle, in place of the family that had rejected her. Janelle took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Yes. The doors swung open, revealing rows of the most dangerous men in the city. They rose as one, faces a mixture of awe and carefully concealed fear. These were men who had seen Matteo Romano kill without mercy, who knew the blood that stained his hands. Yet here they stood, witnesses to something none of them had expected. Their boss, Il Diavolo himself, claiming a queen. At the altar, Matteo waited. His black suit was immaculate, but it was his expression that caught her breath. Gone was the cold mask he showed the world. As he watched her approach, his eyes burned with an intensity that made her shiver. This was the real Matteo, her Matteo, the man who had knelt before her and promised love over possession. The candlelight played across his sharp features, softening them. A small smile tugged at his lips, one reserved only for her. When she reached him, he extended his hand, and Janelle placed her fingers in his. His grip was gentle but firm, grounding her. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The priest began the ceremony, but Janelle barely heard the words. She was lost in Matteo's gaze, in the way his thumb stroked her palm. This man had turned her world upside down, had dragged her into darkness, but he had also shown her light she never knew existed. When it came time for their vows, Matteo spoke first. His voice carried through the chapel, strong and clear. "Before these witnesses, I claim you as my wife, my queen, my everything. You showed me that love isn't weakness. It's the greatest strength I've ever known." His fingers tightened on hers. "I vow to protect you with every breath, to cherish you with every heartbeat, to love you with everything I am. You are my life, Janelle, my forever." Tears pricked at Janelle's eyes as she responded. "I take you as my husband, my king, my partner in all things. You showed me that I am worthy of love, that my strength matches yours." She smiled, seeing the emotion raw in his eyes. "I vow to stand beside you always, to face whatever comes together, to love you without fear or hesitation. You are my choice, Matteo, my destiny." The rings they exchanged were platinum and diamonds, symbols of unbreakable bonds. When Matteo slid the band onto her finger, his hand trembled slightly, something only she could see. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Matteo pulled her into a kiss that made his men shift uncomfortably. But Janelle didn't care. She was his now, truly his, and he was hers. The reception that followed was a display of power as much as celebration. Rival families who had survived Matteo's recent purge came to pay respects, bringing elaborate gifts and carefully worded congratulations. They bowed to Janelle now, these men who once would have seen her as nothing. She sat beside Matteo at the head table, her hand in his, watching the subtle power plays with new understanding. "See how they fear you?" Matteo murmured in her ear, pride evident in his voice. Janelle smiled, squeezing his hand. "They fear us." As the night deepened, Matteo led her to his office, now their office. The room had been transformed, two ornate chairs now standing behind the massive desk. Not a desk and a smaller chair, but two equal thrones. Matteo guided her to sit, then took his place beside her. "How things change," Janelle mused, looking around the room where she had once stood as a prisoner, from captive to queen. Matteo lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You were never truly captive. You owned my heart from the moment you saved my life in that diner." "The woman no man wanted to marry," she said softly, remembering old wounds that no longer hurt. "The woman no man dared to marry," Matteo corrected, his eyes flashing. "Until I proved myself worthy of you." Janelle leaned over, kissing him softly. Around them, the mansion hummed with lifeguards patrolling, servants moving quietly, the machinery of their empire running smoothly. Through the window, the city sparkled, unaware that its queen had been crowned tonight, but they would learn. Janelle wasn't just Matteo's wife. She was his equal, his partner, his match in every way. They sat together in comfortable silence, hand in hand, king and queen of their dangerous realm. The future stretched before them, full of challenges and threats, but neither feared what was to come. They had found something rare and precious in each other, a love strong enough to survive blood and bullets, tender enough to heal old wounds, fierce enough to rule an empire. The Mafia queen that no one dared to challenge had found her throne, and beside her sat the devil who had become her angel. Together, they were unstoppable. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines, it's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.